The house stood alone at the edge of a narrow road, surrounded by open fields and a few tired trees that bent when the wind pushed too hard. It was an old place, not falling apart but clearly forgotten by time. The woman who lived there had grown used to silence. At night, the quiet wrapped around the house like a blanket, broken only by insects, distant dogs, or the low hum of the wind moving through dry grass. That night felt different from the start. The air was heavy, thick with clouds that hid the moon. A storm had passed earlier, leaving the ground damp and the sky restless. Inside the house, a single lamp glowed in the living room. The woman sat in a worn chair, reading the same page again and again without turning it. Her thoughts kept drifting. She could not explain why, but her chest felt tight, as if something unseen was slowly moving closer. She stood and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing moved. The road was empty. No headlights. No footsteps. Just the night. She told herself she was being foolish and turned back toward the kitchen. That was when the knock came. It was not loud, but it was firm. 3 sharp taps against the door. Her body froze. Nobody ever knocked this late. People rarely came at all, especially after dark. She stood still, listening, hoping it was her imagination. Then came another knock, slower this time, almost careful, as if whoever stood outside did not want to scare her. Her heart began to race. She walked quietly toward the door, each step cautious. She did not turn on the porch light. Instead, she leaned forward and looked through the small glass panel beside the door. At first, she saw nothing. Then shapes appeared. Men, many of them. Standing close together, shadows blending into one another. Faces half-lit by distant lightning. Dirty clothes. Eyes wide and tired, she stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. Another knock came, softer now. A voice followed, low and strained. "Ma'am, please. We're not here to hurt you." Her hands shook as she rested one against the door. Every warning she had ever heard screamed in her head. Do not open it. Call the police. Hide. But she did not move. Another voice spoke, this one hoarse. "We just need water. That's all." She swallowed hard. Her mouth felt dry. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. There was a pause. She could hear breathing on the other side, uneven and nervous. Then someone answered honestly, without trying to soften it. "We escaped from the prison up the road." Her knees felt weak. That prison was miles away, but close enough that sirens could sometimes be heard on quiet nights. She had seen transport buses pass by before, thick metal bars over the windows. "How many of you are there?" she asked. 12, the voice said. "Some of us are hurt. We didn't plan to come here. We just ran." Lightning flashed, briefly lighting the porch. She caught clear sight of them then. 12 men, standing in the rain-soaked dirt. Some leaned on others for support. One had a deep cut on his arm, wrapped poorly with cloth. Another was limping badly, his face pale. They looked nothing like the monsters her fear had painted in her mind. They looked like people who had been running too long. Her hand moved to the phone on the small table nearby. She could end this in seconds. One call, and it would all be over. They seemed to sense her hesitation. "We'll leave," one of them said quickly. "Just, please, water, and maybe something to eat, if you have it. Then we're gone." She closed her eyes. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her ears. She thought of how empty the house would feel again once the night passed. She thought of how she would live with herself if she turned them away in something happened to them out there in the dark. Slowly, against every rule she had ever been taught, she unlocked the door. She opened it just enough to speak clearly. "No weapons," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If I see anything in your hands, I close this door." They nodded immediately. Hands were raised, palms open. "I'll bring the water out," she said. "You stay right there." She closed the door again and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass, eyes wide, face pale. She filled every container she could find with water, cups, bottles, an old pitcher. She grabbed bread and whatever simple food was within reach. When she opened the door again, the men stepped back, giving her space. She placed the items on the porch, keeping distance between them and herself. They did not rush her. They waited until she stepped back inside before moving forward. They drank slowly, carefully, as if afraid the moment would break if they moved too fast. One of them spoke again. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do this." She watched them through the open door. "Why'd you escape?" she asked, not sure why she wanted to know. There was silence at first. Then one man answered quietly. "Fear, desperation, bad decisions made worse." Another added, "Not all of us are the same." She believed him. Rain began to fall again, light but steady. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "You can sit just inside," she said. "By the door?" "Just to get out of the rain." Surprise crossed their faces. "None of them moved at first, you're sure?" one asked. She nodded once. "Just inside." "That's it." They stepped in slowly, one by one, careful not to touch anything. The house seemed smaller with them there. The walls felt closer, but the air also felt warmer. Filled with quiet breathing instead of fear, they sat on the floor near the door, backs against the wall. No one spoke for a while. The woman stayed standing, arms crossed, watching them closely. One man winced as he shifted. She noticed the blood seeping through the cloth on his arm. Without thinking too much, she went to the bathroom and returned with clean towels and a small first aid kit. She placed it near him. "I can't do much," she said, "but it's clean." His eyes filled with something that looked like disbelief. "You're risking a lot," he said softly. She shrugged. "So are you." Time passed in slow minutes. The storm moved farther away. The men ate quietly. Some stared at the floor. Others stared at nothing at all. Finally, one of them spoke again. "We should go before daylight," she nodded. "Yes, you should." They stood, gathering themselves. One by one, they looked at her as if trying to memorize her face. "You gave us something tonight," the first man said. "More than food?" She did not answer. She simply opened the door. They stepped out into the night, disappearing into the dark fields. Leaving behind damp footprints and a silence that felt heavier than before, she locked the door and leaned against it, her legs finally giving way. She slid to the floor, shaking now that it was over. She did not know it yet. But that night was only the beginning. The night was heavy with silence. After the 12 men had disappeared into the darkness, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the closed door, her mind racing. Her body ached from tension, and every sound, every creak of the house, every distant animal made her flinch. She could not stop thinking about the men, about the way they had looked at her when they left, the way their eyes had carried a mixture of fear and relief. She felt a strange pull, a curiosity she could not explain. What had driven them to risk everything? And why had they chosen her doorstep? Sleep would not come. She got up and moved to the window again. The storm had passed, leaving the ground slick and shiny under the faint light of early morning. The air smelled of wet earth, of rain and dust mixed together. A few crows called in the distance, their cries echoing in the emptiness. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and sat quietly, trying to make sense of the night. Memories of their faces replayed in her mind. The one with the deep cut on his arm. The tall man who limped heavily with every step. The youngest one, barely out of his teens, who had looked so frightened that she almost thought he would cry. She remembered their voices, soft and careful, trying to assure her they meant no harm. Something inside her stirred a feeling she had not known before. A mixture of fear, empathy, and a strange kind of connection. Hours passed. She tried to occupy herself with chores, sweeping the floor, washing dishes, anything to keep her mind from wandering back to that night. But every sound outside made her startle. Every shadow in the corner of her vision made her heart skip. She wondered where they were now. Were they hiding in the woods? Were the police chasing them? Were they hurting each other or being hurt by strangers? By mid-morning, the tension in the house was unbearable. She could not ignore the nagging feeling that something was unfinished. She remembered what one of the men had said before leaving. "You gave us something tonight, more than food?" What did he mean? Was it just gratitude, or was it something more? She could not shake the idea that her actions mattered more than she realized. Around noon, she decided to step outside. The air was cool and the sky had begun to clear. Sunlight glinted off wet leaves, and the wind carried the distant smell of smoke from a neighbor's chimney. She walked slowly, her eyes scanning the horizon, half expecting to see shadows moving through the trees. The fields stretched wide and empty, but she could not forget the men's faces. They lingered in her mind like ghosts she could not shake. Suddenly, movement caught her attention. A figure appeared near the edge of the field, walking cautiously. Her heart jumped. She froze. The figure paused, as if unsure whether to continue. It was one of them, the youngest one, the frightened one. He looked at her, relief washing over his features, and waved his hand lightly. She took a cautious step forward. "What are you doing here?" she asked softly. I couldn't leave without saying something," he replied. His voice was quiet, almost trembling. "I needed to thank you properly." She motioned for him to sit on the steps of the porch. He hesitated, then did as she suggested. She could see the exhaustion in his body, the strain in his eyes, and she felt a deep sadness for him. "Why did you escape?" she asked again, needing to hear it from him personally this time. He swallowed hard. "Some of us. We made mistakes. Some of us are guilty, yes. But some of us were just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. We didn't belong in there. And when we got the chance to leave, we took it." "You risked so much," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you know what could have happened to you?" He nodded. "I know. We all know. But there was something we couldn't ignore anymore. We couldn't just wait to be forgotten or broken. We needed something else. And when we came here, you gave us that. You gave us hope, even if just for a night." Her throat tightened. She did not know how to respond. She had only offered water, food, and a moment of safety. How could that be enough to inspire hope? He looked at her earnestly. "It matters more than you think. You treated us like people. Not like criminals, not like monsters, just like humans." The words hung in the air, heavy and powerful. She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She realized, for the first time, compassion could carry weight far beyond what she had imagined. They sat together for a while in silence. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying distant bird calls. He did not speak, and neither did she. They shared the quiet understanding of two people caught between fear and trust, both aware of the fragile boundary between danger and safety. Then he spoke again. "I need to go back to them. I need to make sure the others are okay." She nodded, though a part of her wished he would stay. "Be careful," she said. "Don't let anyone hurt you. But thank you for everything." He left, disappearing into the fields, leaving her alone once more. But this time, she felt different. She understood something she had not before. The night had shown her the power of small acts. A glass of water, a warm word, a moment of trust. They could change the course of lives in ways she could not yet see. Hours later, more figures appeared, moving cautiously across the fields. At first she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but as they drew closer, she realized it was not a trick. Several more of the escaped men were returning slowly, carefully, as if the first boy had led them to her. Her heart pounded. She could not understand why they were coming back, and yet, seeing them approach, filled her with a strange mixture of fear and hope. She went inside, preparing quietly, moving cups and water to the porch. She placed bread and some simple food nearby. When they arrived, they did not rush her. They waited at a respectful distance, eyes cautious, bodies tense. She could see the exhaustion etched into their faces. Some limped, some held their heads low. And yet in their eyes, she saw something new, a flicker of trust, a willingness to accept her help again. One man stepped forward, the same one she had spoken with earlier. "We need a place to rest," he said. "Just for a little while, please." She nodded, opening the door just enough for them to see inside. You can stay near the door, but only for a short time. I can't let you roam inside. They nodded, understanding. One by one, they stepped inside, sitting quietly on the floor, leaning against the walls. The house felt smaller, tighter with all of them. Yet it was filled with life and movement, voices soft and careful. Each man watching the others and her with equal attention. She offered water and food again. They took it slowly, almost reverently, as if her generosity was more valuable than anything they had ever known. She watched them carefully, noting how some shared their portions, how some helped the injured, and how all of them seemed to find a small measure of relief in this temporary safety. The morning sun rose higher, spilling light into the room. It felt strange to have light in a space that had been filled with fear the night before. The men shifted and moved quietly, talking in whispers about plans, about the roads they would take, and about the chances of being caught. She listened, learning bits and pieces of their lives, families left behind, regrets, mistakes that led them here. Their stories were heavy, but they were real. She realized that behind every crime, behind every escape, there was a human being, complicated and flawed, longing for a chance to make things right. Hours passed. The men rested. They cleaned themselves as best they could, tending to wounds, fixing clothes, and quietly helping each other. She moved among them, offering small comforts where she could. Nothing luxurious, nothing extravagant. Just warmth, food, and quiet presence. By late morning, she knew that she had to tell them the truth. You cannot stay here forever, she said gently. The authorities will come eventually. You have to make your choice. Keep running or turn yourselves in. They nodded, understanding her warning. They had not forgotten it. But she could see that in this brief time something had changed. They had seen kindness. They had felt trust, and it had planted a seed, one that might grow into something bigger than fear or desperation. She felt an odd sense of peace. The house was no longer just hers. For a few hours it had been a refuge, a place where fear and trust met, where human connection mattered more than judgment. She realized that this night and these men would leave marks on her life. She could never forget. As they prepared to leave again, one man lingered at the door. We will not forget this, he said simply. You gave us more than you know. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Go carefully, she said, and don't let the world harden you. They stepped into the fields once more, disappearing into the distance. She closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. The morning had changed everything. And though the hours ahead would be uncertain, she knew one thing clearly. What started with 12 desperate men knocking on her door had begun something she could not yet understand, something far bigger than fear or danger. The morning after the first night of terror and trust felt strangely quiet. She moved through the house slowly, carrying a cup of tea, listening to the faint sounds of the world outside. The storm had finally passed. Sunlight fell in golden streaks across the floor, illuminating dust and small footprints left behind by the men the night before. They were gone, she thought. They had vanished into the fields, into the forests, into the endless roads beyond her home. Yet she could not shake the feeling that the story was not over. Her heart tightened every time she heard a sound, every time she saw movement through the window. She tried to convince herself it was just the wind, the branches brushing against the walls, birds moving among the trees. But there was an unease in the air she could not name. She went about her morning routine mechanically, preparing breakfast, cleaning the few dishes left from last night, tending to the small garden by the window. Each task was a quiet act, almost meditative, but her mind kept returning to the men. She remembered their faces in detail, the exhaustion in their eyes, the bruises, the desperate hope. She thought about how different the world might have treated them if she had not opened that door. Suddenly, sound cut through the morning air. At first, she thought it was her imagination. Then she heard it again, a footstep on the gravel path outside. Not one, but several. Slow, careful, deliberate steps. She froze, every muscle in her body tightening. She went to the window and looked out. At first she could not believe what she was seeing. Figures were moving across the field. Dozens of them, careful to stay low, careful to avoid being noticed. They were coming from the direction of the prison, moving toward her house. Her mind raced. She thought maybe she was seeing things that the fear of the night before had made her imagine shadows. But as they came closer, she could see them clearly, tired, some limping, some supporting each other. She backed away from the window, her hands trembling. This could not be happening. Not hundreds of them. She counted 1, 2, 3. They kept coming. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The first man to reach the porch stepped forward cautiously. It was the youngest one, the one who had stayed to speak with her yesterday. He raised his hand in a slow, careful wave. His eyes met hers, and she saw something she had not expected. Calm, peace, trust. They are coming back, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. The men did not rush. They did not crowd the door. They stopped a few feet away, forming a loose line, waiting for her to act. Their faces were weary, marked by nights spent running, hiding, fearing every sound. And yet, there was no fear in their eyes now. Only the faint hope that she would welcome them. That she would do what she had done before. She opened the door slightly, unsure of what to say or do. Her voice shook. Why? Why are you back? One man stepped forward carefully. We told the others, he said. They said, if we can trust you, maybe we can trust ourselves to do the right thing. Her chest tightened. She could not understand. Hundreds of men had escaped, running through fields, forests, roads. And now, one by one, they were returning not because they were forced to, but because of something she had done for them. Something. As small as water, food, and a listening ear had carried weight beyond her imagination. The men began to step closer, slowly, cautiously. Some limped, some leaned on each other. Some held their heads low, almost ashamed. But they all moved toward her door, toward the safety she had offered, toward the human kindness they had found. She stepped back, unsure what to do. She could not let them all in, not like last night. Her small house would not hold hundreds of men, but she could not turn them away either. She could not see them suffering after placing their trust in her. Stay outside, she said softly, trying to sound calm. I will bring water and food. The men nodded. They obeyed immediately, spreading out on the grass and gravel, sitting down carefully, hands resting on knees, eyes alert but peaceful. She went inside and filled every container she could find, water, food, bread, even some fruit she had stored. Out! She carried it outside slowly, careful not to trip, not to startle them. When she placed it on the ground, they waited patiently until she stepped back. Then, one by one, they took the food and water. They shared what they had with each other, helping the weaker ones first, tending to minor injuries, adjusting clothing to keep warm in the morning chill. It was a quiet, orderly scene. Despite the chaos of their lives, despite their desperate circumstances, there was respect. As they ate, she observed them closely. She could see the differences between them. Some had hardened faces, scarred by life. Others were soft, almost gentle, as if the world had beaten them too early. Some whispered to each other, sharing small stories. Some stared into the distance, lost in thought. And yet there was a bond among them, invisible but strong. As if the night before had forged a silent understanding, she moved closer carefully. You can't stay here forever, she said gently. The authorities will be looking. You have to decide what comes next. You can't hide from what will happen. They listened. Some nodded, some lowered their heads, but none of them moved. None of them ran. It was as if her words, though heavy with reality, were not frightening them. Instead, they accepted them with the quiet dignity of people who had been running for too long, who had learned the value of small acts of kindness in a world that had given them little. One man, older than the rest, stepped forward. We know, he said. We are not blind to the danger. But you gave us a choice. You treated us like people, not like animals. And that changes things. She did not know what to say. Her heart swelled with a mixture of fear, pride, and disbelief. How could one person's small actions matter so much? She had only offered food and water. She had only listened. And yet here they were, hundreds of men returning, trusting her guidance, trusting her judgment, trusting her humanity. The minutes stretched into hours. More men arrived, carefully moving in small groups from the fields. Some came from the woods, some emerged from the distant road. Each group was careful not to step on each other's feet, careful not to break the fragile trust that had formed. By mid-morning, her small porch overlooked a crowd she could not have imagined. They were sitting, standing, leaning on one another, waiting. Hundreds of eyes watched her, silently, respectfully, without hostility or fear. She felt overwhelmed. She wanted to scream, to run, to lock the door, to hide, and yet she could not. She could not deny them what they had come back for. She moved among them carefully, offering water and food where she could. She spoke quietly, gently, trying to calm nerves, trying to give guidance. "Do not panic," she said. "Stay calm. Move slowly. Help each other." They obeyed. They shared what they had. The injured were tended to. The weak were supported. The fearful were comforted. In that small field outside her home, something extraordinary was happening. People who had been fleeing, who had been hunted, who had been broken by life, were finding order, finding care, finding trust. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, making the morning warmer. She could see the men beginning to relax, their tension easing. Some whispered quietly, sharing memories of last night, of her kindness, the small gestures that had given them courage. She realized something important. This was not about her alone. It was about human connection. It was about trust and kindness. About the power of seeing others as human beings, even when the world had labeled them criminals. She had opened her door to 12 men. And now hundreds were returning, not because they had to, not because they were forced, but because they wanted to. She felt tears prick her eyes, but she did not cry. She simply stood there, observing, listening, helping where she could. She understood, more clearly than ever, that one act of courage, one small moment of trust, could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. By late morning, a plan began to form among the men. They would stay calm, keep together, and make themselves visible to the authorities when the time was right. They would not scatter, not fight, not panic. They had been given a chance to make a choice, and now, together, they would act with dignity. She watched them, amazed at their organization, their care for one another, their quiet courage. She realized that she was witnessing something rare, something extraordinary. The smallest act of kindness had become the center of a chain reaction, one that could change the course of many lives as the sun rose higher. She knew one thing: the world outside her small house would soon know what was happening. And yet she felt no fear. She felt only the weight and wonder of what had begun with a simple knock on her door, a simple choice to act with trust, to act with humanity. The morning had arrived, and with it, a truth she could not ignore. Kindness, even in the darkest hour, could bring people back not just to safety, but to themselves. The day grew brighter, and the sun climbed higher into the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. The woman stood on her porch, watching the men gathered outside. She could not count them anymore. The numbers were staggering. They were no longer just a few tired faces seeking refuge. They were hundreds, standing in small clusters, leaning on each other, murmuring softly. Some were helping the weaker ones stand. Others adjusted clothing or shared water and food quietly. She felt both awe and fear. She had never imagined anything like this could happen. Her small house had become the center of something extraordinary, something that went beyond fear, danger, and escape. It was human connection, trust, built in the briefest of hours. She had opened her door, given them food and water, listened to their stories. And in return, they had returned hundreds of them, trusting her to guide them, to protect them, even for a short while. The sound of sirens in the distance made her heart leap, her pulse quickened. The authorities must have been alerted by now. The police, the prison guards, anyone would be arriving soon. Panic surged through her. She knew the men could not stay here. Her house was small, her property limited, and she had no way to hide hundreds of people. And yet, when she looked at them, she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. They were calm. There was no chaos, no running, no fighting. They had seen kindness, and it had changed something in them. Even now, standing in the open field, knowing the authorities could arrive at any moment, they were not afraid. They trusted her. They trusted themselves. She turned away from the porch for a moment, went inside, and grabbed more containers of water. She also gathered blankets and old sheets she could find. She brought them outside and laid them on the ground, careful to keep them organized. The men accepted them with quiet gratitude, laying them over each other, offering comfort to the weakest and coldest among them. From the field beyond her property, she could see the first signs of vehicles approaching. Lights glimmered between the trees, and she heard voices shouting commands. Her chest tightened. She did not know what would happen with the authorities. See the men as she did, tired, exhausted. Human, or would they see them only as fugitives to be captured at any cost? She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. Stay calm, she called softly. Do not panic. Move slowly. Listen to me. They nodded. Some whispered yes to one another. They began to line up carefully, forming loose rows, leaving space between each other. They did not crowd or push. They moved with a quiet order, almost ceremonial. It was astonishing. Hundreds of men, recently escaped, now standing and waiting, calm, ready to face whatever came next. The vehicles approached closer, sirens blaring, officers shouting commands. But the men did not flinch. They did not run. They waited. They trusted her. A police officer stepped from one of the vehicles, hand raised, trying to assert control. Everyone stay where you are, he shouted. His voice carried authority, sharp and commanding. No one moves. The woman stepped forward carefully. Please, she said loudly enough for the officer to hear. Do not rush them. They are coming forward willingly. They will not resist. Just let them move slowly. The officer hesitated, clearly unsure what to do. Hundreds of men were standing in the open field, completely visible, completely exposed, yet calm. It was a situation he had never faced before. He radioed for backup, trying to control the scene. The other officers arrived, forming a cautious perimeter, weapons drawn but not aimed directly at anyone. The woman raised her hands. Do not treat them like enemies, she said. They are giving themselves up. They are returning of their own choice. Please, let them do it safely. She looked at the men, hundreds of them, waiting, trusting. Step forward slowly, she instructed. Keep calm. Help each other if you need to. Move together. The first group of men began to step forward carefully. One by one, then in small clusters, they walked toward the authorities. They did not run. They did not fight. They did not scream. Their hands were visible. Their movements were deliberate and careful. The officers, shocked by the obedience, lowered their weapons slightly. This was not the chaos they had expected. It was something entirely different, a surrender not forced by threat or violence, but by choice, by trust, by the simple fact that someone had treated them as humans. As the men moved closer, officers began to approach them cautiously. Each man was guided gently, safely, without harm. Some officers whispered instructions. Some helped the weaker ones stand straight. The field was filled with movement, but it was orderly, controlled, peaceful. The woman stayed on the porch, watching. She could not believe what she was seeing. Hundreds of escaped prisoners returned voluntarily, guided by trust and kindness, surrendering not out of fear, but out of something deeper. A strange feeling settled over her, a mix of awe, relief, and disbelief. She noticed one man, the one she had first spoken with, limping toward the officers. He paused for a moment, looked back at her, and gave a small nod. She nodded back, understanding the silent communication. Thank you, he seemed to say. You made this possible. The officers were beginning to take control, gently leading groups into the vehicles and waiting areas. The men complied with quiet dignity, following instructions without complaint or resistance. Some whispered to each other, sharing words of reassurance. Some helped the weaker ones along. The scene was extraordinary. Mass surrender without chaos, without violence, without fear breaking the order. The woman stepped down from the porch and approached the edge of the field. She wanted to see the men more closely to ensure they were safe. As she moved, several approached her cautiously, faces filled with gratitude and relief. You really saved us," one said softly, voice trembling. "We could have run forever, or ended up worse. But you." She shook her head. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just treated you like people. That was all." Another stepped forward. "No," he said firmly. "That was everything. That's why we came back. That's why we stayed calm. That's why we surrendered. You gave us something no one else could." She could not argue. She could not explain why it had mattered so much. She only nodded, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what had happened. The sun climbed higher. Vehicles were filled, men were accounted for, officers were talking to each other in amazement. The woman remained by the field, watching, observing, ensuring that no one was left behind, that no one was treated harshly. She realized that this was not about law and punishment anymore. It was about humanity. It was about the choice to act with trust, to act with kindness, to see people as people, even when the world had labeled them as criminals. Hours passed. The field slowly emptied. Vehicles carried the men safely. Officers reporting back in disbelief at the orderly surrender, at the calm, at the unprecedented situation. She stood alone for a moment, listening to the fading sounds of engines and footsteps. Then a small group remained, the weakest and most injured among them. She helped guide them gently toward a safe area, offering water and blankets, making sure they were comfortable. Even at this stage, she stayed calm, careful, patient. She had learned that her presence, her calmness, mattered more than she had imagined. When the last group left, the field was empty. The house returned to its quiet solitude, but it felt different now. The air seemed lighter. The wind moved gently through the trees. The sun shone warmly on the porch, reflecting off the footprints that would soon fade into the dirt. She leaned against the door, exhausted, heart still pounding. She had witnessed something rare, extraordinary, and unforgettable. Hundreds of men had returned not because they had to, not because they were forced, but because one person had shown trust, kindness, and understanding. It was a lesson she would never forget, that humanity could ripple outward in ways no one could anticipate, that small acts could change lives, that courage did not always roar, it could be quiet, patient, and gentle. By evening, the house was silent again. The officers had left. The last men had been taken to safety. The field was empty. And she understood that the world outside her small house would never fully know what had happened here. What had begun with a knock, a glass of water, and a simple act of trust. But she knew. And the men knew. And for a brief, shining moment, the world had been changed not by force, not by fear, but by a single act of human kindness. The house was quiet once more. The sun had begun to dip low, casting long, soft shadows across the fields and the small garden by the porch. She stood at the window, watching the empty road and the fading footprints in the dirt. The chaos, the fear, the tension of it had disappeared. In its place was a silence so deep it felt alive, filled with the memory of what had happened over the last 24 hours. She walked slowly to the kitchen, leaning on the counter. Her body ached from exhaustion, her mind still spinning from the events she had witnessed. She had never imagined that opening her door could ripple outward so far. 12 men had knocked first, desperate and broken. Then more had come, drawn by trust and a small act of kindness. By morning, hundreds had returned, surrendering peacefully, guided not by fear, but by hope. She sat down at the table and placed her hands on the worn wood. Her mind wandered through the faces of the men, the young one with fear still lingering in his eyes, the older one who had stepped forward to guide the others, the ones who had limped, bleeding and weak, yet maintained dignity as they waited for her instructions. Each face came to her, vivid and human, and she realized something extraordinary. Her small actions had reminded them of something they had long forgotten, that someone could care about them simply as people, not as criminals or statistics. Hours passed slowly. She moved from room to room, tidying, preparing food, trying to do ordinary things to keep her mind grounded. Every now and then she would pause and glance out the window, half expecting another figure to appear on the horizon. But no one came. The fields remained empty. And yet, the memory of the hundreds who had gathered, calm and orderly, remained with her, vibrant and alive. She thought about the officers who had arrived. She remembered their surprise, their confusion, the way their commanding presence had softened as they realized the men were surrendering voluntarily. She had seen the disbelief in their eyes as they watched order emerge from what should have been chaos. She realized that sometimes courage and humanity could achieve what force never could. The men had returned not because they had no choice, but because they had been treated with dignity, because someone had trusted them when no one else had. Even as the sun set, the memory of their calm faces stayed with her. She could see their trust reflected in every careful movement, every quiet word spoken to one another. It had not been easy for them to come back. Fear had still lingered at the edges. The world outside was dangerous. Authorities were coming, and yet they had chosen to act with patience, with care, with trust. That choice was more powerful than any threat or punishment. She thought about the young man again, the one who had first approached her that morning. He had looked back at her as he limped toward the officers, nodding, silently acknowledging her role in what was happening. She realized that what she had done for him and for the others was not about heroism. It was about recognizing humanity where it had been ignored. It was about giving someone a reason to act differently, to believe in themselves, to act with honesty and trust when the world expected them to act in fear. Night fell slowly. The house grew dark, the windows reflecting the quiet stillness inside. She lit a lamp, letting the warm glow fill the living room. The shadows danced across the walls, and for a moment, she thought she could still see them moving in the corners of her mind, the men she had helped. The faces, the gestures, the quiet obedience and trust. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. Letting the memory wash over her like a gentle tide, she remembered the voices, low and careful, thanking her, acknowledging her humanity. She remembered the way they had waited, patient, even when fear could have driven them to panic. She remembered the older man who had led them gently, and the small acts of care they showed each other as they sat in the field. She remembered the ripple of kindness spreading outward, unseen by the rest of the world, yet powerful enough to bring hundreds back safely. Tears came to her eyes, but she did not try to stop them. She let them fall quietly, silently, a recognition of something profound. It had been terrifying, yes. She had been afraid. And yet, she had also seen the extraordinary power of human kindness, of trust, small acts that can change lives in ways no one can measure. She thought about what would come next. The men would face consequences. Some would go back to prison. Some might have opportunities to start again, to rebuild. Some would carry the memory of this day with them forever. And she would carry the memory of them, the faces, the quiet trust, the surrender that had come not out of fear, but out of hope. She realized that her life would never be quite the same. She had opened her door to strangers, to fear, and to uncertainty. And in doing so, she had become part of something larger than herself, part of a story that would never be fully told. But that had changed the course of hundreds of lives. Night deepened. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, looking at the stars. The world felt vast, and yet intimately connected. She understood something she had not before, that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is trust. And sometimes it is simply a decision to act with humanity when no one is watching. When no one expects it, when the night is dark and the world is uncertain, she thought about the door she had opened. The simple act that had started everything. A knock, a few words, a small gesture of trust and care. And from that small act had come a ripple so powerful that hundreds of lives had changed. They had returned, not because they had to, but because they had chosen to, guided by trust, kindness, and the memory of one woman who saw them as human beings, the wind moved softly through the trees, carrying distant sounds of the night. She breathed deeply, feeling the quiet in her chest, feeling the weight of what had happened. She did not know what the future would bring, but she knew that something extraordinary had taken place. Something rare, something human, something unforgettable, as the stars shone overhead. She understood the lesson clearly. One person's courage, one small act of kindness, one moment of trust, could ripple outward in ways that could never be predicted. One door opened in the dark could bring hundreds back, not just to safety, but to themselves. She sat there for a long time, letting the silence and the memory of that day fill her. She thought of the men, of their faces, of their careful, patient movements, of their quiet gratitude. She knew she had witnessed something extraordinary, something that could not be measured, something that would stay with her forever. And in that quiet night, she finally understood that what she had done, so simple, so human, so small, had been enough to change the course of many lives. Not through force, not through fear, not through punishment, but through trust, compassion. In the simple act of seeing someone as human, she closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it all. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe fully, to relax, to feel the peace that came from knowing she had done what mattered most. The night stretched on, calm and still, and she knew that the memory of this day, the knock, the trust, the return would never leave her. It would live in her heart in the quiet moments, in the understanding that humanity, even in the darkest hour, can shine through, quietly, patiently, powerfully. The world outside would move on, but inside her, the memory of what had happened, the faces, the trust, the courage, the ripple of kindness would remain. A reminder of what one person can do when they act with humanity in a world that often forgets it exists. And she understood, finally, that this was a story without an ending, because its impact would continue in ways she could not see, in lives touched and changed forever by one small act of courage in the dark.